Hello, everyone. We'll continue our discussion on some miscellaneous topics. In this slide set, we'll talk about identity. Sorry, it should have been identity. I'll fix that typo when I release the slides. And specifically the Google sign-in. So we'll see how we can integrate with the Google API, get the sign-in information for the user, and use it appropriately in our app. So it makes it easy instead of having to build the login authentication mechanism on the back end. And then in the next video, we'll talk about using locations. So recommended reading resources. So how to add the sign-in workflow and how to integrate Google sign-in with your Android app. These are from all of these are from Google Authentic documentation, of course. And then when we go to locations, we have the location aware apps guide, starting with the overview. And in all of this, we'll use a Google Play services. So there is a starter page for that as well. Okay, so feel free to take a look at these. These are great resources for developing not just on Android, but also on other platforms, because Google authentication is a fairly common way of authenticating and then using the user identity, be it iOS or hybrid or web app. Any of those can integrate with Google in that way. All right, so so how to use Google sign-in for Android? First of all, why Google sign-in for Android? So as you can imagine, it is a simple, trusted, and secure way to let people sign in using their Google credentials. So I mean, all Android devices will have a Google user, of course. So it's more natural to just use that authentication built by best in the industry. And as I said, you don't have to then deal with providing the authentication mechanism. It's not just a matter of providing, a database table with, say, login name, email, password, blah blah blah. There is this sense of security and privacy associated with it, and Google, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, those all they handle it pretty well. So you don't really have to worry about it. So we'll simply use it. Uh, Prerequisites, or what all you need. So the device must have Android 4.1 or newer, plus Google Play Store installed on it. And we have been targeting all apps on API 21, which I think is 5.1. So we should be good. Emulator can have Android 4.2.2 or newer. And again, Google Play Services version 15 or newer enabled on those. And for development, you should have the latest version of SDK, including the SDK tools component. We have already set these things up in our first assignment, so you should be good to go. But if any unexpected errors come, then make sure you have all these requirements, which we won't be checking every time at this point onwards. And the project should be configured to compile with Android 4.1 or newer. So again, this is something we are assuming you'll be doing, but if not, make sure you have it. Okay. So in Gradle, you would add this line: implementation, com Google Android GMS, and then Play Service authentication with its latest current version being 18.10. So adding this provides us with classes and libraries that can let us authenticate and use those authentications. Okay, so Google Play Services a little bit. So Google Play Services is beyond authentication. Of course, you can use all latest Google powered features, including maps and locations and Meet and Hangout and all those as well, automatically in your apps using the APK that is provided through the Google Play Store. So the advantage is it's users receive fast updates of all of these, they can simply use these things, and it's easier for you as a developer to integrate these awesome Google features into your app by simply integrating with or connecting with the Google Play services. The last link on the recommended reading slide takes you to the details on Google Play services. I won't go into the details of that here. It's fairly easy to read and straightforward to integrate, but that is what we are doing. Okay, all right. You might have also heard about the Google Developers API Developer Console. Um, so this is a service from Google where you can go create a project and let that project then have certain authentications or certain APIs exposed for clients. So our clients will register for that project and use the APIs that the project has enabled. The so this is the URL where you can go and set things up. It provides a certain quota. I think it has like 15 projects on the free quota that, and I've used a few, so it's giving me this warning. And there are of course limitations on daily usage of API calls, etc. But of course, for our purposes, you are not going to hit that quota. Even with my all 8 projects, 7 previous and this 8th project so far, I have not hit the quota. So that shouldn't be a concern. Please go ahead and create a project there. You may have to log in with your Google ID, and I mean, you will have to log in with your Google ID and may have to provide some other permissions when you do that. It's been a while since I set it up, but it's fairly straightforward. All right, then in there, create a new project, give it a unique name, and the project ID is usually created for you from that. So I'm just creating a sign-in sample. It attaches an ID to it. You can, of course, edit it to make it more readable. But yeah, that's a simple step. So once you have created that, um, so what we are doing is we are enabling the authentication API in this project, and then our client will connect to that. Okay, so once that is created, you see the sign-in sample here in the dropdown, and um, and then in the credentials tab, um, you should choose which type of application this is. And you can add credentials for different type of clients. So here we are adding for Android. So for Android, then name, give it any meaningful name. And the package name should be the package name of your Android app copied from the manifest file. And then it requires the SHA-1 SHA-1 fingerprint from the developer command line. Um, you have a debug key store and a production key store. So since we are developing and not putting it out there, the debug key store suffices. Usually the debug key store is at this location, home.android debug.keystore. On Windows machines, it could be similar, slightly different, and it may be different on some other machine. So make sure you find the proper key store. If you do that, if you run this command, you basically get a command line output, and then there is a SHA-1 key that you can copy. Oh yeah, by the way, the password for this command is going to be Android for the debug key store. Okay. Okay, so copy that and paste it here on your web console, and then we are good to go. Okay. So once you do that, you'll see your OAuth client is added here. Now its type is Android. It has some client ID, blah blah blah, and so on. Yeah. So we won't really need the JSON file, but for this purposes, but for some other authentications or other usage of the app, like making API calls, you would need it, so you can download it and then integrate it with your project. Okay. So now getting into the hardcore code, how to actually use it. In your main activity, we are going to see, uh, we are going to create a Google sign-in client variable, and will also create a Google sign-in options variable. So Google sign-in options is the one that gives us um, the ability to sign in, of course, and you can add different options to it, as the name suggests. So here it is saying we'll build the sign-in with default and will request the user email from that. So if you don't request the user email, it will only give you the display name and of course the ID that is at the back end. If you request email, then you are able to grab the email of the user from the object that is created and so on. Okay, so here in this example, we request email and then we get the client with that GSO object. So these Google sign-in options are passed into the get client call on Google sign-in. By the way, all these classes, Google sign-in client, Google sign-in options, Google sign-in, etc. They are coming to us because we added that line to the Gradle file. Okay. All right. So once you do that, now you have a client that can listen to this particular authentication. Yeah. Okay. Best practices suggest that only request the scopes that are required for your app to minimally function. Like, if you don't need email here, don't ask for it, and you can request additional scopes only when you need them. But usually, getting the email alongside a display name is fair enough. Users won't complain if they see that particular dialog box. All right, so that was in onCreate. Now in onStart, you should check if you have the last sign-in account. If you have it, then you don't really need to go and ask for the user again. Okay, so that's the idea. If you have it, and you grab it and pass it to your logic, which updates the UI. It may show welcome, blah, 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 or show some personalized content, etc. So that is what update UI can do, and you simply pass it what you obtained here. Yeah. So this method get last signed in account. It checks if someone is already signed in. If it is, then it returns a non-null um, uh, object. If no one is signed in, then it returns null. So we'll handle null not here, but in the update UI. Okay, so this is the first UI or first version of the sign-in app that we are going to create. And what we see here is simply the Google sign-in button. Now, this is a special button, which again we get because we added that dependency in Gradle. So what we have here is com Google Android GMS common sign-in button. That is the type of the button, and rest of it is simple. I mean, here you can give it any constraints, give it an ID, etc. One thing I would like to mention is it did not take the on-click attribute. So we'll plug it in the old way. We'll attach a listener, and that way we'll add the on-click listener. All right, so yeah, like this. So set on-click listener is the Google sign-in call that I'll have in my main activity. Okay. All right. So what do we do in that Google sign-in call? That one, there we create a special intent and simplify the intent. So very straightforward mechanism consistent with what we have seen before. So the Google client, we get the Google client, and on that we call get sign in intent, and then simply fire that intent. Yeah, RC sign in is the return code, request code, as we have used before. Then in your on activity result, where you'll get the result, that's where you handle it. How do you handle it? You basically check for the request code, and once it matches, you ask for the get signed in account from intent. Okay, and that returns a task object. This task knows, or it contains the relevant information, and then you should handle your result based on that task. Okay. Yeah, by the way, this task is always completed and you don't need to attach a listener to it like you would attach to an asynchronous task. So this is of a similar type, but um, eh, yeah, no listener is required because this is guaranteed to complete. It may complete with, I mean, it may return um, with a failure code, but it will complete for sure. Okay, now handle sign in result. You get that completed task, and inside that, yeah, so you catch an exception if there is a failure, but if not, then you would have the appropriate result here. Okay, so you call get result, pass it the API exception class, and then you get the Google sign-in account as a return value from it. So this indicates the sign-in was successful, and you should change the UI accordingly. If you are in the catch block, it means there is a failure. Your get status code will give you the failure code and all the details. It's obviously difficult to create this use case. But yeah, in that case, pass it a null. And what it means is you should do all the null handling in the update UI, not in its callers, because we'll be calling it from multiple places where the value can be null. Okay, so if you get it successfully, pass the account variable. If it's a failure, pass it a null. So now let's take a look at our update UI. Okay, so in update UI, um, for now we are simply creating a toast where the message is, if it's null, the message is no user is logged in. Otherwise, it says this user is logged in and gives its display name. Okay, so just like account dot get display name, you could do account dot get email, etc. If we did not request the email when we built the GSO, it will return a null. So be careful with it. Don't so you don't run into null pointer exceptions. So yeah, this is the code we have, and yeah, you can also get the client side user ID using using dot get ID, and it is recommended that you use the ID to uniquely identify the user. For example, store it as the primary key in your database, etc., instead of the email. One of the reasons being Google allows different variants of their email ID. For example, Google emails, as you perhaps know, are dot agnostic. You can put a dot anywhere, and it doesn't mind. So, for example, I could go s dot uh, w dot a dot r dot etc. or not use any dots at all, and both emails let me sign in. So checking equivalence of emails is not a good idea to identify the user. You should simply use the ID from the Google authentication. Okay. All right. You should also allow for logging users out. So in the next variant of the UI, I have added the I've added a logout button, and in that, what you can do is basically on the sign out again add a on complete listener, and in that on complete listener you can revoke access. Okay, so revoking the access is a good way of doing things, a recommended way of doing things, because you should um, you should basically let the users choose whether they want to continue using your app with their Google login, right? And once it's completed, you should implement the logic to respond to revoking access. For example, deleting database, etc., and deleting that user record from database, etc., on the on complete. Okay. Yeah. So that's all about logging in users. Let me actually quickly show the demo sort of this app. Um, All right, yeah. So here is the yeah, here is what you can see for the sign in and sign out buttons. Okay, so yeah, let me remove all the logcat messages. So this is like we start afresh. When you click sign in, no one is signed in, and it's now showing us the Google sign in. Okay, so I click my signed in information there, and you see user logged in toast as we saw earlier. Then if I sign out, I'm logged out and no user is signed in. Okay, so yeah, this is a very simple use case. Let's see. Okay, I guess I'll stop here because we already discussed the other things. Okay, thank you.